The third thing we said very quickly was the prophet spoke. Peter tells us of glory to follow. God has this salvation that is for all people. It comes through the suffering of Jesus and the resurrection, and the result of this would be glory to follow. Many passages in the Old Testament speak of this future time. Some of them are speaking of the experience of salvation in this present broken world, but many of them are pointing towards heaven and the living hope that Christian believers have because of Jesus. When Jesus did come into the world, he said to his disciples, "Many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see, and they did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but they did not hear it." So there's three specific ideas here that for hundreds of years were laid down in a nation's history through these prophetic men. God's grace is for all, the Messiah will suffer, and there is a glory to come as a result of what Jesus, the Messiah, achieves. The prophets couldn't see clearly how this was going to be fulfilled. They were straining to catch a glimpse of it. But when Jesus comes into the world, he is the perfect fulfillment of everything that's been said before. Remind you that verse later on in the chapter, verse 20 and 21, where Peter says that Jesus was chosen before the foundation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. None of this is an afterthought or a mismatch. It isn't a plan B. It's not been cobbled together like a coalition government. This is God's plan from the beginning. Actually, no, from before the beginning. He meant to do things this way, and he has achieved everything he set out to achieve. Right, Peter moves on to speak about apostles. And he says that they too were inspired by the Spirit of God, not to predict these things, but to explain them and proclaim them and to preach them. And this is a very important link, isn't it, that Peter makes between the prophets of the Old Testament and these special men apostles in the New Testament. These apostles were eyewitnesses, as we've said. And you can't underestimate the role that Jesus plays in this. Jesus said to his disciples right at the very end of Luke's Gospel that all of these Old Testament scriptures, they're all about him. And he says to them, this is how it must be. The Messiah had to suffer and die and to be raised to life so that the gospel could be preached to all nations. And you can read that in Luke 24. The disciples were very slow to understand and make that connection, as I'm sure we would have been. But Jesus has to make that link and spell it out for them, how it all fits together. And Peter is seeking to remind these people, encourage them of the fact that they are part of the same story. And so are you. It's the same story. These apostles are not just making this up, but have been sent by Jesus himself to declare what the prophets foretold and what Jesus has achieved. All of this is from God, and all of this is for you. Just a little aside here, if we can, and before we close. Peter here is agreeing with the Apostle Paul. There's a couple of amazing references in 2 Corinthians, another letter that Paul wrote. And he says in 2 Corinthians 4:15, all of this is for your benefit. But in 2 Corinthians 5, a little bit later on in verse 18, he says, all of this is from God. I think I had it here. Here it is. This is what Peter's trying to say to them. All of this is from God, and all of this is for you. That's what he's trying to say to them, isn't it? You are part of this story. God has done it, and he's done it for you, individually and corporately. The prophets foretold it. Jesus fulfills it. The apostles declare it. Let's, I love to think in pictures. So here's my little overview of this Here's history, beginning to end, like an umbrella, the umbrella of history. And God is the sovereign king, the creator over all of that history. And here's you and me, Rotherham, 2010. I don't know how near to the end of that history we are, but there you are. I'm sorry I've not got a skirt on because most of you are ladies, but generic human being. I'm including you all in that. How do you fit into this story? Well, let me show you. Here's the prophets. In the Old Testament, many different men over hundreds of years, they foretold what was going to happen when Jesus comes into the world. You've got that? Jesus then is born exactly the right time in exactly the right place, and he fulfills all of those prophecies in a way that they could not see before it happened. And then the apostles who saw these things, Jesus sends them out to preach it. This is a picture of a statue in St. Peter's Square in Rome of the Apostle Peter preaching. And he's got the keys of the kingdom of heaven in his right hand, as Jesus said to him in the Gospels. Peter is writing to these dear Christian believers who are struggling and suffering because of their faith. And he's saying to them, the prophets predicted it. Jesus fulfills it. We have declared it to you. In the power of God's Spirit, you are part of this story. Did you get that? It's an incredible reality. No wonder Peter says at the end of this section, even angels long to look into these things. I couldn't think of a graphic to put, because I don't know what angels look like, to look down over this. Can you imagine angels on tiptoes on the very edge of heaven, metaphorically speaking, looking at God's unfolding purposes in this world and scratching their heads and thinking, what on earth is God doing? What on earth is God doing? The prophets couldn't quite see it. The angels couldn't quite grasp it. Even angels long to look into it. Do you know what? It isn't for them primarily. It's for humans. For you. Broken, fallen, failing people. And as the angels look on and see what God has done in history, prophets, Jesus, the apostles, they can only stand back and marvel as God is unfolding his glory in his broken world. These people are struggling, as we've said, and Peter is wanting to encourage their hearts and help them to remember who they really are. Well, we're going to close, and I want to give you a couple of challenges as we close. How can we respond to this? Well, some of you, I know that you are like these people that Peter's writing to. You have a faith in Jesus Christ. You're believers. And I want to remind you, if Peter was here, he would want to remind you of who you are. The salvation that is now yours through Jesus. What an incredible privilege to know this living hope. Some of you, I know, perhaps from time to time forget those things. Difficulties overwhelm you. Life seems so hard, perplexing things, and it grinds you and you begin to lose perspective. And instead of remembering who you are, your vision is taken up with other things. And maybe sometimes it's tempting, isn't it, to give up hope of ever finding a way through problems and difficulties. Listen, all of this is from God, and all of this is for you.